Thank you so much for the introduction. Sarah, can you just confirm? Can you hear me?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, fantastic. Always good to do the tech check at the beginning of any presentation. So thank you everyone for being here. This is Planning for the Future, a review of e-learning in academic libraries. My name is Kathryn Barrett, and I'm a liaison librarian at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. I'm responsible for the departments of anthropology and health and society. And I'm also a member of our library's Learning Objects Committee, which leads some of our work with online teaching and learning. And Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Fedko. I'm also a liaison librarian at UTSC. I'm responsible for political science, global development studies, and the Center for Teaching and Learning as a liaison librarian. I serve with Kathryn on our Learning Object Committee at UTSC Library.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So today we'll be discussing UTSC Library's efforts to develop a plan to integrate e-learning into our information literacy program. And we'll be exploring the three methods we've used to gather information, which were a survey, follow-up interviews with very generous folks who filled out the survey, as well as a literature review. And we've used those three streams of information because one of our library's values is making evidence-based decisions. We really wanted to make sure that we were going out and doing the work to inform our plan. We'll also be discussing some of the next steps of this project because it's still in progress. And we really hope that you'll leave our session with a better sense of some e-learning trends in academic libraries within Ontario, as well as ideas for how you could do similar work about developing a plan for e-learning at your library. But before we dive into our project, we just wanted to give you a little bit of context and background about our situation out at UTSC and how our library sits within the kind of greater University of Toronto system, because I know that can be a little bit opaque for outsiders. So the University of Toronto Scarborough is the satellite campus of U of T that has approximately 13,000 students, which makes us pretty similar size to a mid-sized Canadian university. And we're primarily an undergraduate campus. We have pretty limited postgraduate programs. And out of the University of Toronto system, we're noted for our cooperative education programs. And we also have some joint programs with Centennial. We're pretty big on having partnerships with other organizations and communities out in Scarborough. The UTSC campus is served by a single library, the UTSC Library, which has a complement of 19 librarians. And most of us serve as liaisons, and some of us also have some additional functional duties. And something that's unique about our library is we also host the Digital Scholarship Unit, which supports data, digital humanities, digital collections, digital preservation, really all things digital, as well as scholarly communication. And we're also involved in the Bridge, which is a multi-purpose academic space that's a partnership between the library and the Department of Management that supports business, finance, and entrepreneurship, which are really growing areas for our curriculum. And in terms of information literacy, one thing we really wanted to emphasize is that the UTSC as a university, as well as the UTSC Library, we're actually operationally independent from the rest of the University of Toronto system. So we are free to develop really our own unique information literacy plan. We're not really beholden to what's happening on the other two campuses. But of course, across our tri-campus system, we do really believe in collaboration. So we have one representative on the Library Teaching and Learning Committee, for example, that serves all three campuses. And we also do get involved in collaborative projects. So for example, the liaisons in their disciplinary clusters, or just reaching out to their counterparts. But the plan that we're working on right now is really just meant to serve our UTSC community. All right, so what is it that we're actually doing in terms of this project? So just as a little bit of background for how this came about, we found that e-learning was a really significant and growing part of UTSC's information literacy program. And we anticipated that approaches like blended learning or flipped classrooms, or really any other form of e-learning was going to take up more of our information literacy work in the future. And in practice, this has definitely been accelerated by the pandemic when we've been doing more online teaching than ever. So we wanted to ensure that we were following best practices to develop a really strong, scalable, and sustainable e-learning program that was part of our existing information literacy framework. And in order to do this, we were tasked with developing a research research-based plan. So again, we really wanted it to be evidence-based for how we would handle e-learning at UTSC Library, with recommendations specifically concerning the future of support for online teaching and learning. And that support could be in terms of human resources, financial resources, or technical resources. We're trying to really get a lay of the land for what we would need to make this work. And just as a bit of background as well, we've defined e-learning for the purposes of this project as being any kind of synchronous or asynchronous instruction sessions, as well as distance learning, but also encompassing things like online tutorials, interactive learning objects, so for example, made with H5P, as well as blended learning and flipped classroom structures. And really at the end of all of this, we're trying to develop an evidence-based plan. And we went out and we conducted a literature review, as well as tried to gather information from our colleagues about what they're doing at their libraries through both a survey and then follow-up interviews. And the scope of our project was trying to answer questions like, what have others done to incorporate e-learning into their information literacy plans? How are they evaluating the effectiveness of this online instruction? What tools and resources do they have to make this work at their library? And then just because of the times that we're operating in right now as well, what were the effects of the pandemic in terms of e-learning at your library? And do you think that you'll keep any of the learning from that or the activities from this time? Or are you just sort of reverting back to how things were before? So we began this work in September of 2021, a wild and busy time. And we know that this is, a pretty hefty undertaking. So we're expecting to have our draft plan ready probably by spring of 2022, but we have a little bit of flexibility there. And what that will mean is that we will present our reports first to our Learning Object Committee, which is where this work originated from, then also doing presentations and solicitation of feedback from our colleagues, and then finally presenting it to senior administration at our library. So today we'll be sharing the activities we've done so far and presented some preliminary findings from kind of all three wings of this project. So the survey, the interviews, and also our literature review. Just letting you know what we found out so far in terms of some initial first observations, as well as what we plan to do in the future.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about our survey. So to begin, we sent a short survey about e-learning practices to colleagues working at academic libraries across Ontario. We did this via the eLearning Symposium listserv and OLA. We received 10 responses from 9 different institutions, 2 colleges and 7 universities. Thank you very much to everyone who responded. To begin, we asked some questions about the libraries and the institute and our colleagues' institutions. So our first question was, does your institution have a distance education program or teach online courses? Almost everyone responded yes. So 90% of our respondents have either a distance education program or online courses at their school. Next, we asked whether or not e-learning was explicitly included in their library's instruction plan or broader strategic plan. And again, we got 100% of respondents said yes, it was. Next, we wanted to know a little bit about what resources and supports librarians had in order to facilitate e-learning at their individual libraries. 100% of respondents said that they had technology, either software or hardware, accessible to them to support e-learning. 90% actually said that they also had human support, so either staff or student workers to support their e-learning projects and initiatives. But it wasn't too terribly common to have money support, so funding. Only 30% responded that they had immediate access to funding to support specific projects. And 60% of respondents said that there was either an instruction committee or other similar groups supporting e-learning at their library. Next, we want to ask a little bit about, again, more about engagement in e-learning. And so we asked librarians to rate how often they were engaged with e-learning before the pandemic, 1 being never, 5 representing the majority of instruction happening online. As you can see from our graph, all respondents reported limited to no e-learning work previous to the pandemic. To explore this a little further, we asked respondents whether to let us know why they were or were not engaged in e-learning before COVID. Reasons for engagement in e-learning included, again, mentioned most of the respondents had online courses at their institutions, so they were supporting courses that were already online. Several mentioned that they were experimenting with a flipped classroom model, and a number of respondents said they were creating asynchronous e-learning materials such as videos for individual student use. Reasons for not being engaged basically centered around not having opportunity to be engaged in e-learning. Particularly, a number of people mentioned that instructors just de facto expected instruction to happen in person, not online. Next, we went on to ask people what their e-learning looked like during the pandemic. Not surprisingly, respondents reported that their work was divided into 2 main categories: synchronous instruction, so online open registration workshops were moved online, and course-specific instruction were done synchronously online as well. Librarians also reported building an increasing number of asynchronous learning objects. Most people were engaged in this beforehand, but not surprisingly, the number of objects they were building increased during the pandemic. Most people were using software that they previously had access to, so LibGuides, videos, H5P. Some reported getting new tools to work with during the pandemic. One example being Articulate Rise 360. Next, we asked people to future cast. We asked what people thought might happen in the future, whether or not e-learning would continue to play a significant role in their library, or if they thought we would be going back entirely to in-person instruction. Generally, most people said that, well, they anticipated most instruction going back into in-person, that some elements of online hybrid instruction were likely to remain. Main reasons given for that were that it provides greater flexibility for our learners, and in many cases reaches a larger number of people than we might otherwise have been able to reach with our instruction initiatives. One common project or instruction task that many people mentioned they thought might remain online was open registration workshops, just for greater accessibility. We all moved all of our workshops, including online registration open registration workshops, online during the pandemic. Many people mentioned that they got much higher attendance online than they did when those workshops were offered in person, theorizing again that this offering it online just allowed much greater accessibility for our students. So several people are considering keeping those workshops, or at least some of them, online, even once we're back to in-person instruction. So now we wanted to take a little break from us talking and reach out to you for your opinions on this particular topic. What role do you think e-learning will play in information and literacy instruction at your library in the future? We were wondering, is there anything you're particularly looking forward to getting rid of in e-learning? Is there anything that you're hoping to keep? And what factors do you think might affect whether or not to keep, again, certain aspects of e-learning in your own instruction or in instruction at your library? Please feel free to respond in the chat or turn on your mic, and would love to hear people's thoughts and opinions on this topic. So again, what role do you think e-learning may play in instruction at your library in the future? Really, really long videos need to go in the future. I very much agree. Librarians love to share, and we go on, but the videos have to be chunked so they're as accessible as possible to our users. Definitely. So anything else people would like to get rid of? Using third-party videos instead of making our own videos from EBSCO ProQuest. So do you think that's something that we're likely to keep, or something you'd like to get rid of? You're creating more of your own videos, definitely. No, opposite. Okay. Central repository of already made videos with Creative Commons license that we could all pull from. Oh, that would be awesome. The more we can share, the more scalable and sustainable our workload is. Is there anything anyone's particularly enjoyed with e-learning? Like anything you would love to see more interactive tutorials to allow for self-paced learning? We will keep doing online instruction at Sheridan. It's convenient for students. Convenience is definitely a factor. We've been using WebEx and moving to Teams for winter for online synchronous APA sessions. Continuing to keep interactive components. Yeah, yay for H5P and lots of other tools. Quizzes, multiple choice, fill in the blank. Opportunities to create new ways to connect. Make sure everything is accessible, compliant. Testing super short videos to show students how to use databases, how to start analyzing problems. We're aiming for TikTok length videos. It should be interesting, definitely. Same, okay. So yeah, short and sweet videos. So in terms of factors influencing your decisions, a couple of people have mentioned accessibility, that online has some real accessible options. Oh, Matt mentioned creating a bank of online objects so we can start reusing things. Definitely, the more we can adapt and reuse is awesome. Would like to see more faces on videos. So long, yeah. We keep going with e-learning at St. Mike's. Even when teaching in person, it's useful to have online videos or activities to support teaching in the classroom. Definitely, it can be great as supplemental material and for getting to students who we might otherwise not see. Before we finish up with this question, I was just curious. We've mentioned it's useful to have supplemental material. We can reach a larger audience with online instruction. Are there any other factors that might affect whether you keep e-learning or move to in-person, or your general decision practices around e-learning? Just curious, no? Okay. Thank you for your staff ability to support all the things. Yes, once we've created, we have to maintain it. And that, as we've all learned the hard way in my case, sometimes that takes a lot of work in and of itself. Definitely short-staffed, a virtual workshop can be really useful to reach out, particularly if you work on a campus with multiple locations. Yeah, so e-learning can help with We need the people to maintain it, but it can help if we're lacking an in-person. Thank you so much for your active discussion, and we'll just move on to the next slide. Next, as part of this survey, we asked respondents if they would be willing to meet for 50-minute interviews for a more in-depth discussion of e-learning practices and experiences at their institutions. Thank you for everyone who we've met with so far, and for those who volunteered to make it a later date. We've done 2 interviews this fall, and our goal is to conduct the rest of the interviews over the winter. Again, thank you for everyone who's volunteered. Your willingness to chat is much appreciated. I'm just going to summarize some of the points that have come up so far. With interviewees, Kathryn and I chatted about some of the challenges of e-learning. One of the big ones is not a surprise. We just don't have enough time to spend on e-learning as librarians in the 21st century. We all have to split our focus amongst multiple responsibilities, e-learning being just one of many. So sometimes it can be a challenge to do it justice while taking care of everything else we have to do during the day. Another common challenge that came up in our discussions is librarians in one library and one liaison program often have very different levels of expertise in creating and delivering e-learning, either as synchronous work or asynchronous objects. And librarians, again, within any library or liaison program, often have very different levels of awareness about available resources, be it human resources to support their work at their individual library or further out in their institutions, such as any local centers for teaching and learning, and knowledge of technology, whether it's available through their institution or freely available. And of course, learning how to use all that takes time as well. So we've gathered some great tips from our interviewees. Again, thank you so much for sharing. Some suggestions that have come up for a successful e-learning program is the benefits of having somebody to coordinate the program. So somebody knows what's going on and can help move everyone forward as a group. The importance of having a professional development for everybody. So meeting the librarians where they are and regularly providing professional development opportunities for everyone to upskill and continue to develop their online instruction skills. Also discuss the importance of documenting and sharing common expectations for learning objects. For example, videos, making sure everyone knows what an accessible video looks like, but also looking at expectations for your institution. Should it be short? Does it need to be branded? Yes, yes, yes. If yes, making sure all that is documented and that everyone has access to that shared checklist, for example, or checklists that they can use to review their learning objects before publishing. Another important thing is ensuring everybody is aware of all of their resources, people and technology to support e-learning, and engaging in regular communication to make sure everyone's aware and gently remind them, because again, everyone has so much on their mind of everything that they have available to them. And finally, we discussed, as has been just discussed in the chat, the importance of promoting the use of and development of OERs. We're all in this boat together. We all have limited time and resources. So we're using material when it's possible and when we do create material, considering putting a CC license on it so colleagues can take and reuse material that you've created for your teaching. So we wanted to stop again and just seek your thoughts and feedback. Based on your experience of e-learning in libraries, is there anything you would add to our tips list? So is there to run a successful e-learning program at the library? Again, please feel free to respond in the chat or turn on your mic. Any thoughts? Rapid prototyping can help in preventing getting bogged down with all the details early on. Definitely. Any other suggestions for us? All thoughts are appreciated. Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. Let's continue. We also talked to interviewees about future planning. So general agreement was that some content is likely to stay online or in hybrid, but this will depend pretty heavily on different institutional, departmental, and instructor expectations. Something we just noted from that is this it's possible to mean in the future that not only could institutions end up being quite different from university to university, college to college, but even within an individual library, it raises the possibility that two liaisons working in the same library system may engage in vastly different amounts of e-learning depending on the expectations and culture of the departments and instructors that they're serving. While practices may differ, we discussed that some content is likely to stay online just due to accessibility, possibility for increased attendance, reaching just a larger number of students. Open registration workshops, again, seem to be a prime candidate to stay online, at least partly post-pandemic. And lots of people seem to be discussing creating continuing to build on their existing library or collections of asynchronous learning objects. We also discussed with interviewees the importance of discussing e-learning needs in the we discussed that e-learning needs for individual librarians and for the library should be included in any future planning discussions for and within your individual library. Lots of opportunities, but it is likely to be a significant area which we'll need to work together with to figure out how to move forward. So one final question from me. Just curious, have you been discussing e-learning at your library as part of your future post-pandemic plans? And if yes, are there any plans that you'd be comfortable sharing? If not, no worries. Again, have you been discussing it in your library? Yes, no. If yes, are there any plans you'd consider sharing? Please feel free to contribute in the chat or turn on your mic. No. Has anybody been discussing this at their libraries for post-pandemic life? Just curious. Yeah. Definitely. So good luck with your conversations. I hope all moves forward productively. We dropped the e-learning. Yeah, That's all they'll be learning. I think that's a really good point, Haley. That previously e-learning, at least from our experience, was seen as kind of a separate thing, but now it's really just going to be all learning, whether it's online or in person. Well, thank you very much. So now I'm going to pass the mic back to Kathryn, who will discuss our literature review.
Thank you, Sarah. Give you a little break from talking. So I'm going to be talking about the third prong in our information gathering process as we were informing our own local plan for integrating e-learning into information literacy instruction. And that was a literature review, because librarians love a good literature review. For our purposes, we searched 4 databases, and that included all 3 of U of T's library and information studies databases, as well as 1 education database, because we thought since we're focusing on online teaching and learning, education would also have some relevant content. And what we ended up doing was we structured these searches around 3 concepts: online education, information literacy, and academic libraries. And we used subject headings and keywords for all 3 of those concepts across all of our 4 databases. And then once we had run those searches, we exported all of the search results into Zotero, which is the citation management software that we use on the UTSC campus. And that took care of all of the deduplication for us, thankfully. And then after that, we started screening the articles. And we decided to just focus on those from the past 10 years because we thought they would have the most relevant trends and case studies. And as part of our screening, we looked at the titles and the abstracts as an initial kind of screening tool just to see, make sure that they were relevant. And that helped us get down to a collection of 199 items out of an initial starting point of over 1,200. But even about 200 items was still a lot to expect to get through just by the end of the semester. So what we did was we used the tagging feature within Zotero to essentially tag all of the articles according to larger categories. And we still intended to go through and read the articles and take notes on all of them. But just at this initial stage, we thought the tagging would help us figure out what is being discussed the most in terms of e-learning within the literature. Are there any commonalities? Can we notice any trends right away? So this table right here will show you the main categories that we used: assessment, best practices, case studies, the COVID-19 pandemic, and e-learning tools. That was the kind of overall breakdown, and we were sort of categorizing that according to the things that we were hoping to take away from the literature review. And we found that by far, in terms of coverage in the literature, case studies made up over 50%. So 117 of the articles out of a total of 199. And just as a quick side note, you might notice if you add all of this up, it adds up to more than 199. And that was because there were a couple of articles that were actually tagged as being part of more than 1 category, and we wanted to capture that. So case studies made up the bulk of the literature. So very practical articles about how libraries incorporated e-learning at different levels of support. Super practical. But then we also had the next most common category being best practices. So guidance for other libraries about how they can best go out and support e-learning. And then the next largest category was tools that are being used to create e-learning objects. We wanted to take a deeper dive into the case studies to figure out, were these case studies focusing on support for individual courses? Were they supporting departments or departmental programs, or did they relate to the whole library, which is really what the purpose of our project was for? And we found that most of these case studies were taking place in the context of support for a single course, so 39 of those case studies. And that the next largest group was support for the whole library. But there was sort of a heterogeneous group of articles related to the whole library. We found that a lot of them in practice just sort of talked about support for a couple of select courses that librarians were involved with, most often in the context of support for first-year education or as part of a foundational skills program, which we don't necessarily do at the UTSC library, but we thought we can still get some learning from that. But overall, there weren't a ton of case studies that were sort of a how-to for how to integrate e-learning into a full kind of embedded information literacy program that was run across all of the different departments we support as part of a liaison program. In terms of just a little further breakdown, we also wanted to see how close to home these articles were. So 3 of them related to libraries in the province of Ontario, and an additional 5 talked about libraries elsewhere in Canada. And then we also wanted to take a deeper look at some of the e-learning approaches or methods that were discussed within the articles. We found that in blended learning was discussed the least. It was only 2 articles. And we found that actually those articles tended to skew a little bit older from the beginning of the 2010s. Next most common was embedded librarianship, and that tended to peak in the literature about 2015. But most recently, the sort of favored approach within the literature, at least in terms of case studies, is the flipped classroom. We've actually found articles published all the way up to 2021 for this approach. So it seems like the one that's being explored the most. We also tagged all of the articles relating to tools for e-learning to figure out which ones are discussed most frequently or are used most frequently to support e-learning. And by far the most common was web tutorials. So we had 32 articles that talked about web tutorials, and that category would have actually been even larger if we had incorporated the split screen tutorials into that as well. So split screen tutorials are things like guide on the side or sidecar learning tutorials. So if we had rolled those in as well, it would have actually been 39. Next most common was the old standby LibGuides, or really any kind of research guides. Next after that was modules. 4th was split screen tutorials, because as I mentioned, we did split that out. And then tied for 5th was digital badges, teaching using the learning management system, which in our case is Canvas, or developing videos. But there are also some really unique approaches that are starting to come up, like gamification, for example, as an e-learning tool, or using apps, developing online learning communities, participatory technologies, so things like sort of interactive polling, like using Mentimeter, for example. And even GIF technology as well, which was really interesting. So creating a GIF for a really short tutorial. So actually, quite a variety of things in terms of tools that are mentioned here. And then finally, we just wanted to talk about some initial observations or takeaways we had from the beginning of our literature review, because we're starting to dive, after tagging, into actually reading through the full text of the articles and deciding what we want to include or exclude. So first, we noticed that there's a subset of these articles that talk about best practices for developing an information literacy program generally, not necessarily making a distinction between in-person or e-learning. It all does fall under the umbrella of learning, as we were just saying earlier from the comments. But there are some takeaways that we can take from that. So for example, at Western, we found a really interesting recent article talking about the development of information literacy outcomes as a first step in creating a coordinated information literacy program. And we thought that that could certainly translate into the context of incorporating e-learning as well. You would still need really strong learning outcomes for that if it's going to be a coordinated approach for the whole library. More specific to e-learning, we also found that there are a couple of articles talking about best practices as you're planning to develop an e-learning program. So one example we found in the literature was actually from earlier in the 2010s from Wilfrid Laurier University, where they were evaluating their existing online instruction program. And this was in the wake of an external review where they got some recommendations about shoring that up. And figuring out its future goals. And so as part of this, they're pretty ambitious. They analyze the technology, pedagogical models, organizational structures, administrative supports, and partnerships that they would need to succeed as they developed that e-learning program. And there were a lot of really handy recommendations in there that we're going to take on board. It was also quite common as well to find articles talking about how to make the shift to online instruction during the pandemic. How could we do that successfully? So for example, the one article I just highlighted here was talking about instructional design to create online video content. And I was really happy to see that Haley put in the chat talking about rapid prototyping, because that's what this article was actually about, where they were talking about the advantages of designing and developing your video content concurrently, so that it meant that you were able to turn around those videos and use them a lot more quickly than if you spent a lot of time initially, gathering user needs and analytics and things like that, putting your effort into those early stages. And then finally, we did manage to find one case study so far that was actually about redesigning an information literacy program to integrate e-learning, which is exactly what we're trying to do out at UTSC. And this one was actually at Nanyang Polytechnic University, where they're figuring out solutions to integrate information literacy e-learning modules across their curriculum. So we were happy to see that there are actually articles within the literature that are getting at what we're looking for, but we did find they're pretty light on the ground, at least so far. And then just to give you a sense of what our next steps are as part of the literature review. So as I mentioned, we had tagged the articles to figure out broadly what they were getting at, but now it's time for a more detailed review, going through the complete PDFs and extracting data from all of them. But we also wanted to emphasize that we're not happy with just looking at the published academic literature. Our next step will also be diving into the gray literature. Because one thing we did notice was we expected to find more articles about e-learning in the context of the pandemic, but when we did some reflection, we realized that, all of our bandwidth was pretty limited. I think trying to get through the pandemic, publishing an article or even like writing a manuscript is a very labor-intensive process that I think a lot of us probably didn't have time for, with all of our other priorities. So we expected we'll find more of that in conference abstracts or papers or presentations. So we want to seek those out to gather more literature about that. And then we're also going to be looking for reports from professional organizations as well, because we think that we'll have really interesting discussions about where information literacy instruction stands right now, and also doing some future casting and figuring out what those trends are and what the best practices will be. So we wanted to pause again and think through all of our 3 ways of gathering information. So our survey, our interviews, and our literature reviews. And we wanted to check in with you and get your feedback. Do you have any advice or suggestions or comments about what we've done so far? In particular, is there anything you think would be lacking that would be, a really fruitful avenue for us to pursue, or anything of that nature? So I'll give you a couple moments to type in the chat, but as usual, you're also welcome to unmute and chat with us out loud as well. So I will put into practice what I would do if I was teaching with students and leave an awkward pause here in which you can type. So advice, suggestions, comments, anything else we can do to inform our plan for incorporating e-learning? Not seeing anything in the chat so far, but I'll leave you just another couple moments. We're really eager to get your participation, as you can see. All right, well, not seeing anything, I will move on. All right. Hopefully that means we've been very thorough. There's nothing you could think of that we've overlooked as part of this process. Okay, well, I will hand back the floor then to Sarah to talk about our next steps.
Thank you, Kathryn. So I'm just going to do a quick review of what we're planning to do in 2022 to hopefully work our way through and complete this project. So we're coming up to the winter break, yay. When we come back, we'll be reconvening, starting up with this project again. Our goals over the winter will be to complete our literature review, complete all of our interviews, and then our outcome is going to be to create and present a report outlining best practices and recommendations to our library's Learning Object Committee, which we call LOC, and our senior administration. And as Kathryn mentioned, we're aiming to have this completed and submitted to our colleagues and administration by the spring of 2022 with a little wiggle room. But sometime around the spring, we're hoping to be finished. And at that point, we're also going to seek more opportunities to share what we've learned with the broader community within U of T libraries, but outside of U of T libraries as well. So that is pretty much it. So just wanted to give you one more opportunity. If you had any questions, comments, suggestions around our next steps or our work in general. Don't see anything coming up. So I'm just going to go on and say that's it. Thank you so much for your time and attending our presentation. Can't wait to hear your final results. Thank you, Kelly. We can't wait to share. On the last slide, we're still thank you to everyone who's responded, but we're happy to chat with more people, either if you would like to be interviewed as part of our project, or if you just like questions, concerns, comments about what we're doing, please email us anytime. Would love to interview as many people who'd be interested as chatting. Otherwise, we're happy to informally chat anytime about instruction at your particular libraries. And again, if anybody is interested, our survey is still open. So we've included the survey link there. If you haven't done so already, please fill it out if it's of interest. Otherwise, again, thank you so much for your time. We appreciated the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.